Hi, and welcome back to the Drama Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. Today, I am so excited to be welcoming my fellow dietitian, Maggie Moon. Maggie's one of those people, I don't even remember when we first met, but for the past decade, I'm just always really happy to run into her at events and conferences. And today we are talking all about the mind diet. A little bit about Maggie. She is a Columbia University educated, culinary school trained, award winning registered dietitian and best-selling author with clinical training from top-ranked New York Presbyterian Hospital, which is where I actually did my internship. And she also consults with government agencies, national nonprofits, and global brands. And she also serves on a number of expert advisory boards. So the second edition of Maggie's best-selling book, The Mind Diet, A Scientific Approach to Enhancing Brain Function, was published in December of 2024. And it's a just gorgeous book. It is full of so much useful info. For some of you guys who've been with me a while, you know I'm obsessed with brain health, and this book really delivers. It's fully updated with new tips and tools based on the latest research and reader feedback. And it's a great tool for anybody who's just looking for practical nutrition solutions to enhance their cognitive resilience, metabolic health, and mental well-being. So very aligned with all the things I love nerding out with you about. So I am so excited to bring you this conversation. Maggie is just full of wisdom and has so many great tips to share. So yeah, check out the book. And in the meantime, here is our conversation. Welcome to Drama Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Maggie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I always love running into you at events and just chatting. So it's really lovely to be just having a conversation today and nerding out on all things mind, diet, and nutrition. I love asking my fellow RDs on this podcast just about kind of their journey, because I feel like in our field, there's so many ways that someone finds their way here. What inspired you to become a dietitian?
A lovely question. I think that growing up, maybe as a dancer and as an athlete, I always had that natural connection between what I was eating and how I was feeling and performing both on and off the field. And also had along the way my fair share of injuries, especially as I became a full-time dancer and choreographer in my young adulthood. And so when I was thinking about what comes next, I wanted to be a helper of some kind and looked at different avenues. I did look at pursuing medical school and eventually did a lot of soul searching and decided that I didn't want to see people by the time they got sick. I'd rather do something that would affect them, that they could do something about themselves in a practical way every single day. So that's really what was the clincher and made me decide to go back to school for nutrition.
Love that so much. I can relate to that a lot too. For me, it was definitely about preventive care and helping empower somebody to take charge of their well-being and feel great and hopefully avoid getting sick. Said.
Exactly. Yes. Prevention is so much less painful than the cure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And something that I really love that you focus on a lot in your work is mind diet and brain health and, how nutrition can really support that. I'd love to hear what made you interested in really focusing in this area.
Yeah. So interesting question, because you made me realize that I've been doing this for about 10 years. Don't know how a decade went by, but at the time, brain health, neuronutrition, how to eat for optimal brain health was an emerging field that was really just a few decades old in terms of more research, formal practice. And so it was exciting. It was exciting to learn about. What we've learned about the brain itself, aside from nutrition, has just really exponentially grown in the last couple of decades as well. And so we are just learning at this really incredible pace. And then when the Mind Diet research came out in 2015, it was really exciting because it was not about molecule or a specific nutrient. It was about this whole dietary pattern. And I think that really resonated with me, not, of course, as a dietitian, but also because I think that's just the way that I was raised. We didn't call it food as medicine, but food was our medicine. And the way that if I wasn't feeling well in our house, there was no cough syrup or aspirin. It was rest and it was what you were eating. And so I think that's another reason why a dietary approach really resonated with me.
I remember when that research came out, and I can't believe that was 10 years ago. That's just wild to me.
Hmm.
It was so cool. Because I remember at the time, so I have brain stuff on all sides of the family. Lost one grandfather to Parkinson's, the other to Alzheimer's. I spent a number of years working in an ALS clinic. I did a lot. I loved my neuro rotation during my internship. So like the brain, I was also fascinated by like the food mood connection. That was a big focus for me really
Mm-hmm.
early in my career. So to see that research, I was so excited by that. It's so fascinating to me that like our lifestyle and our day-to-day eating patterns can really influence our brain's health.
Yeah, I felt like a literal light bulb went off and it just everything made sense
Yeah.
and fell into place. So yes, we're on the same wavelength.
But for someone who is not a nutrition nerd, what does the MIND diet stand for? Like what does that mean?
But the nice thing is that the mind diet tells you that it's about the mind. So that's helpful, but it is actually this monstrous acronym that stands for the Mediterranean Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So it's a lot. Essentially, it's a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet, which is meant to lower blood pressure, and it's been optimized for brain health. That's what it stands for.
I love that. I remember like really early on, like hearing, I can't remember who it was, but someone in the field talking about how what's good for the heart is good for the brain.
Yep.
And I remember hearing
Mhm.
that and just, I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense.
It really does. And a lot of the cases of dementia we think are vascular dementia. And so, the brain needs one out of every five calories, it needs 20% of our oxygen. So it makes sense that the better our blood flow is to the brain, the better our oxygen and our nutrient flow to the brain is going to be as well.
So, for someone who's not familiar with the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet, like what are some of the things that you would tell them that the MIND diet involves, or like whether that's specific foods included or specific patterns? Like, what would you want someone to know about the MIND diet?
I would want them to know that it is about 9 core types of food to eat more of and about 5 to limit, but that nothing is off the table, nothing is eliminated. So that's what I would want them to know. There's no outlandish supplements or specific foods you have to eat. The categories are broad enough that you can really build a diet, a food pattern around your preferences, your traditions, what you have access to.
And are there certain foods that people are surprised that they can eat as part of the MIND diet?
I think that people are surprised that there's no limit on healthy fats. So there is still a little bit of lingering fat phobia. When did that come from? Like the 70s or the 80s, or I don't know. But there's healthy fats in nuts and fatty fish and super healthy cooking oils like olive oil. There's no limit on that. It tends to work itself out. You're not going to be having a 90% fat diet anyway. So the balance just works itself out. I think the other thing they're really surprised by is that you don't have to give up your favorite foods. So if you have a favorite food that might be a food that we want to limit, like butter or full fat cheese or like a big fat steak, you can still include that in the pattern. It's just about balance.
I love that message so much. I don't know if you've come across this in your work, but I know because I still do some work with clients. I do see some private clients in group settings, but I find that there is still, you mentioned fat phobia, like that is still alive and well. Carb phobia, definitely a thing.
Mhm.
And I do find that there is still this idea that there are foods that are bad, that, we should be like feeling ashamed for liking. Like I was just thinking this the other day, like when someone tells me, like when they're like, usually like someone I'm just meeting for the first time, they're like, well, I try to be healthy. Like I don't eat pasta and I don't eat bread. And they just start telling me all the things they don't eat. And I find that so interesting. I'm like, is this what our food culture is telling women is healthy?
Well, it's interesting. There's this older book called The United States of Arugula that I was not expecting to talk about today, but It's such an interesting book about the food history in the United States and sort of where some of those philosophies are deep seated and rooted in our history and why we assign morality to food. And it comes from centuries and centuries of history of considering it that way. I think when we understand that it's a construct, it helps us deconstruct it.
That's called the United States of Arugula.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to link to that in the show notes. That's amazing. I have to look that up. I'm intrigued. That's yeah, I find that stuff fascinating. But you mentioned okay, so you mentioned stuff like butter, steak. If somebody is looking to like limit these foods, but still include them, like, are there guidelines you would offer in terms of like how to think about it in terms of like how many times a week or a month or anything like that?
Right. And so this is what dietitians are so good at translating that research into practice. Because when you do a research study, you need a very specific protocol that you are following. And so there are rules that are in the research. Those are guidelines. They don't always translate well to everyday living. And so I would say that when it's something that's very high in saturated fat or added sugar, like a full fat cheese or a pastry or a sugar sweetened beverage, we want to really limit those as much as possible. I'd say less than once a week. So maybe thinking about every couple weeks, maybe a couple times a month, enjoying those as a treat. For something like butter or like a high fat steak, maybe that's something more like at the most a small amount. Most days of the week, I think is okay. Or if you want to enjoy that steak, like maybe once a month, once a week, that's okay. It's about portions and balance.
I like that. That is something I really love about the mind diet, that it's about balance and sort of making space for the things that you love. I go back and forth with the in my heart, I am an all foods fit. Like that makes so much sense to me. But I also see that that comes under a lot of like ridicule, and that
Hmm.
there's like concern for people there not being enough nuance, I guess, to that. And that's
Hmm.
something I love about the mind diet is that it's like and maybe you can share some details about this, but like, this is like how many servings of like these types of vegetables, and this is where
Hmm.
blueberries should fit in, and like how
Hmm.
about beans? And like it does offer some specifics, but then there's
Hmm.
also room for flexibility. And I love that.
100%. And I think also when people start adding the foods that are recommended, it's going to naturally crowd out on the plate room for some of the other foods that maybe have been dominating your standard American diet. So it recommends leafy greens almost every day, whatever. Let's just have them every day. Another serving of vegetables every day. So right there, you've got two servings of vegetables, which is more than most Americans get. You've got berries a couple times a week, which is great. You can have them frozen, so you don't have to worry about perishability. You can have them any time. Whole grains every day. You've got your choice of lean proteins between lean poultry and fatty fish, which is still a lean protein, even though it's a fatty fish. Olive oil, so many delicious things. Beans and nuts, really good things to snack on.
Thank you for clarifying that about the lean protein and fatty fish. That's a question I get actually pretty regularly. Like someone will be like, I don't understand. I'm told to eat lean protein, that fish is lean, but then I'm told that certain fish are fatty, and it's like really confusing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, I know. It's because it's got the omega 3s that we want, but it's still a very small amount of fat total. So,
Yes.
yes, it's fatty compared to other fish, but it's lean compared to protein in
So
general.
a question I also get sometimes, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is about
Mm.
wine. Like, I'm often asked, well, what about red wine? Should we drink red wine because it's healthy and it's got antioxidants? Like, what do you tell people about how red wine fits in?
Yeah, complicated. So I would say that I'm never going to tell someone to start drinking red wine if they don't already enjoy a glass of wine. So that's number one. I would say that it's a matter of preference, individual choice, and we have to weigh the benefits and risks. And so, the WHO came out with a recommendation to eliminate all alcohol and that no amount of alcohol is safe. And I think that made a lot of headlines, and people are starting to hear that. And that report is specific to cancer risk. On the other hand, we have large population based data that says that a small amount of alcohol of wine is neuroprotective. So how do you balance those two things? I think it's about, again, portions and balance. So if drinking a glass of red wine is already part of your practice, your culture, if it's part of how you live, then enjoying a small glass, 5 ounces, not one of those modern day wine
Your
glasses that you can
goblet.
fit an entire bottle of wine in every night, then that might be reasonable. But going beyond that to two, three, four, 5 glasses is always going to do more harm than good. So it's definitely, you want to keep it on the low side if you do enjoy it. And on the research side, it's mixed and it may be protective for the brain.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that because that's another one. Talk about like, bio individuality and like really needing to look at like your unique situation. Like, I find that with my clients, some people tolerate alcohol just fine, or maybe they don't have a family history of cancer, so it's not as much on their radar. Then I work with people who they're like tons of cancer in their family and maybe they don't want to mess with it, or they have like no alcohol tolerance, or, so it's
Yeah.
so individual.
I just wanted to mention that within the Mind Diet, that even the people who have the highest level of compliance were still only following about 75% of the recommendations. And they saw that their risk of Alzheimer's was cut in half and that their brains were able to slow down the aging of their brain by up to 7.5 years. And that by following a little more than half the recommendations only, there was still a moderate benefit of a 35% reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's. And so my takeaway is that here's a great recommendation of foods that we know support the way that our brains can function optimally, but we don't have to be perfect. In fact, we could get a C on our diet scores and still reap so many of the benefits. And so if someone is worried about wine or alcohol for any reason, they don't have to feel like it's going to hurt their brain health. They don't, because there's so many other things to do to support brain health.
I love that message so much because it is so easy to get sucked into thinking you have to do things perfectly. I hear this all the time from
Yeah.
clients, like, and I know for myself, like, I definitely, like, we were talking earlier about like perfectionism. I definitely got into like perfectionist mindset around food when I was like deep in my fertility journey. And I was like, if I eat the wrong kind of yogurt, it won't happen. And like, it's just, and then I was like, well, there's other reasons it's not happening. Like, it's not about the yogurt, it's not like just the shampoo I'm using or whatever it is. Like, all of these things, like, I think that's really meaningful to share too, that like 75% adherence is still a really big, meaningful deal. I love that. And so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this too. I know you do talk about this in the book. Non Western cultures, I think that something that I'm asked about sometimes, and that I wish was a little bit more like front and center when we talk about
Mhm.
Mediterranean diet research and the mind diet is that it doesn't have to look exactly the way it looks in the Mediterranean. And so for, what tips would you offer somebody who wants to know about how to implement this style of eating, or how can it be adapted to just non-Western diets?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that when we understand how it works, right? Reducing oxidative stress, reducing inflammation, helping neurotransmitters talk to each other more effectively. When we understand that what's doing that is high antioxidant foods, healthy fats, high fiber foods, all those things, when we understand that, we can really apply it to any culture around the world. And the nice thing is that even as it stands now, the food groups in the Mind Diet that are recommended are pretty broad. So something like whole grains, something like leafy greens or vegetables, you can find those across different cultures already. Something like olive oil is a little more specific, and I would just look for the healthy liquid plant oil in the culture that you want to adapt this to. And we've actually seen research in where the Mind Diet has been adapted in Korea as well as in China and shown really positive brain health benefits. So it's been tested in the research already. But even without that, dietitians can help to adapt those categories of food into our own foods, your own foods, foods that feel like home to you so that you're more likely to adhere to it. We've seen that come up in research as well. You'll enjoy it more because food is not just medicine. Food is culture, history, tradition, social connection, joy, sometimes sadness, all the things.
I love that so much. And it's so true. So food can be quote unquote healthy, or a diet can be like the healthiest for you, but if it doesn't feel like home, like it's going to be really hard to implement that. And is that even the right diet for you then? I love that you said that.
There's actually an impact on mental health because if you don't have the psychological safety of your own cultural foods, it can really deteriorate your sense of your self esteem, and we've seen that in some psychosocial research. And I know that's an area of interest of food and mood for you, so I'm happy to share that with you. But it's really interesting how simply giving someone their own cultural foods can boost their self efficacy to eat healthier and improve their mental health status.
So important. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that needs to get talked about more. Like it's just, there's people I work with that, the first time we meet, they think that I am going to tell them they have to eat grilled chicken and broccoli and brown rice. And those are like the only acceptable foods. And I always appreciate like being able to get rid of that stress or that worry that's like, worrying about that some foods are correct and some foods are not correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%.
So if someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, the mind diet sounds like it could be a really good fit for me. Like, what are some practical ways to start implementing these principles in just everyday life?
Yeah. So if you're just getting started, I think one of the easiest places to start are snacks because you're not going to break the system of your meals right with a snack. And so snacking on nuts 5 times a week during your weekday is a great, super simple starter tip. The next thing I would say is leafy greens because they're very highly correlated with brain health. Look for ways to incorporate that. So I get a big box of that triple washed baby green container at least once a week. And I just add handfuls to smoothies. I add handfuls to soups. I add them to omelets. I also make big salads. I add them to grains and green bowls. So just look for ways to add those. And when you have that triple washed box, I find it's really easy because I don't have to go through anything. I just grab it. Um, for beans, I think a great starter is like hummus. Hummus is everywhere. You can pick some up. It's also really easy to make at home. Next up, I would hit breakfast. You can have a smoothie with nuts and berries and all the good things. You can have an omelet with all those good things as well. And sometimes people struggle with the fish recommendation because we just don't eat a lot of fish in this country. And so my background is South Korean and Korea is a peninsula, so we eat a lot of fish. But I would say for anyone who's concerned about that, they're concerned about, perishability. If I buy it, then, it goes bad. So tinned fish and frozen fish
Yes.
are a way to keep fish in your so-called pantry at home so that you always have it on hand and very easy to incorporate things. I've got some recipes in my new book, The Mind Diet Second Edition, about how to use some tinned fish, some really easy ways to cook fish as well. And fish cooks really fast. I wish more people just recognized what a convenient food item it is. And then the last tip I'll give that's on the practical tip side is thinking about one bowl meals. And I'm using bowl sort of metaphorically, anything that comes in one container. So smoothies, like I mentioned, you can incorporate multiple foods from the Mind Diet. A grains and green bowl, grains and greens, and then you add some beans and some lean protein and another vegetable, and you do some olive oil dressing, and you've got like like basically all the Mind Diet foods in one bowl. Same for like a soup, like get some cans of beans and add them to a turkey chili, and add some sweet potatoes in there. You've already got so many foods involved. So yeah, the whole one bowl, one pot concept of just getting the most for your effort in one meal.
Love that. Those are some amazing tips. And yeah, we do a lot of tin fish in my house because it's just so easy, so good. But like, see, I really wish people would explore frozen fish more because it is so damn convenient. It's like it defrosts quickly, it cooks quickly. Like it's just so simple. I love it.
My trick for that is I do thick slices of lemon because the fish, you can cook it from frozen. You don't even have to defrost it. And you do thick slices of lemon underneath it, and then you steam it for it to cook through. And
Mhm.
because of the lemon wedges, not only are you steaming with beautiful lemon, but also you're preventing like the bottom from getting scorched because you do have to cook it like a couple minutes longer because you are cooking from frozen.
That is an awesome tip. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So, okay, I just have one more question because I have two questions for you. One, just
Sure.
practical stuff, housekeeping. If people want to buy your beautiful new book, learn more about your work, connect with you, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a website at minddietmeals.com. and I'm the same on social.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to link to all of that in the show notes. Okay, so my real last question for you, and this is a question I ask everybody who comes on here because I love that there's so many ways to answer it. It's ever evolving, but today at this moment in time, Maggie, what does healthy living mean to you?
I think it won't come as a surprise based on our conversation so far, but my word is really balance. And I could start it and end it there, but I'll say a little bit more. But it's, balancing work and play and rest and also calm have been really important to me in the last couple years and practicing all the things that allow for that balance. So I live by the six pillars of brain health: eating well, moving more, sleeping soundly, managing stress, engaging the brain, and making time to connect with others.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been really nice.
And for all you guys who are out there listening, thank you for tuning in. I so appreciate your time and your energy. If you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. They do matter and help me continue to bring you great guests like Maggie Moon. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time. And just one more thing. I may be a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. The information in this podcast is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. It is also not a replacement for individual counseling. Always check with your healthcare provider for questions related to your own health and well-being.